We do have some breaking news just coming in from the Supreme Court. I want to get straight over to CNN's Caitlin Polans, who's pulling together the details from us. And this has to do with President Trump's moves to freeze foreign aid. Caitlin, what's happened?
Yeah, Kate, what had happened in the Trump administration is they turned off money going to nonprofits and contractors on foreign aid, people that were working with the organization USAID, the agency that the Trump administration was trying to shut down. And what the Supreme Court, what Trump wanted to do is he wanted a green light from the Supreme Court to keep that money shut off. It's being litigated at the trial level courts far below the Supreme Court. And what the Supreme Court just said is, we're not going to do that. We need the lower court to figure this out. There was a judge there who had set a deadline for the administration to pay up $2 billion by midnight of a day last week, was giving them less than 24 hours to do it. And the administration said, we can't just turn money back on like that. That's why we need the Supreme Court's help here to let us do what we want with our bills and just not pay them, freeze all the money that was outgoing.
Hey everyone, welcome to Dr. John Podcast. So what just happened, guys? On live television, Trump publicly shamed the Supreme Court over a ruling he called partisan and deeply flawed. But the ruling was 6-3. And 3 of those 6 justices were his own appointees, Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, and Barrett. They looked at his emergency power grab and said, no, you can't cry Democrats in robes when your own picks voted against you.
And now it's going to go back down to the lower court. But Kate, when you step back and look at what's happening in this order right here, it's 5-4. And the 4 dissenters of what is being done right now for Donald Trump, those people are all of the conservative justices. And what they are saying is, we can't believe that this Supreme Court is going to override what the executive wants to do here and just give this lower court trial judge, Judge Ali in Washington, D.C. on the district court, the power to figure this out right now. So a big struggle between the court system and Trump as president ongoing that we're going to keep seeing happen in the courts. Kate?
I was going to say, my take is like, this is not the last time this conflict and struggle is going to be playing out and making its way back to the Supreme Court. This is the beginning of a very long road here, but an important decision coming from the justices nonetheless. Caitlin, thank you so much for jumping on so quick for us.
His televised meltdown exposed the massive gap between his self-image and reality. Let me walk you through exactly what happened, why it matters, and why the international press is now describing Trump as having ruled like a monarch for a full year before the court finally said enough.
Here with us to break all of this down, it's very, very significant. CNN's chief legal affairs correspondent, Paula Reed. This was an incredibly fast decision by the U.S. Supreme Court.
It was, and it's rare that the Supreme Court drops a decision on us at 9 o'clock in the morning. And look, this decision was pretty technical, but it really reveals a lot about the divides within the court itself. This is the second time that Trump's efforts to reshape the federal government have gone up to the high court. And here specifically, the Trump administration was asking the court to keep foreign aid frozen, but the court declined to do that. They actually sent that whole issue back down to the lower court to decide if those funds need to be released. Now, this is the second time that the Supreme Court has declined to intervene on Trump's behalf, but I want to note the larger questions about what Trump can and cannot do with DOJ, with this kind of foreign aid.
The case was about tariffs, sweeping, globe-spanning tariffs that Trump had imposed using emergency powers from the Environmental Protection Agency. Think about that for a second. The president used an environmental law, a statute designed to regulate pollution, to impose massive trade restrictions on foreign nations.
Those questions have not been answered. The Supreme Court has not weighed in on what we call the merits or the larger constitutional questions. That's going to take some time, but again, twice they've asked the Supreme Court to help them out, and twice they have declined.
And basically, correct me if I'm wrong, the House of Representatives and the Senate both passed authorizing legislation for these billions of dollars in foreign aid. Then they passed separate appropriations bills, and then the president signed both bills into law. The Supreme Court saying if you want to change that, there's got to be additional legislation on the Hill and more action by the president.
So I think eventually the Supreme Court will have to get at that issue.
That is not a creative legal interpretation. That is a stretch so extreme that even a conservative Supreme Court with 3 Trump appointees could not swallow it. Chief Justice John Roberts wrote the majority opinion. He said Trump's use of EPA emergency powers crossed constitutional lines. He said the statute did not give the president the authority to reshape global trade policy through a backdoor environmental provision. He said the emergency powers claim could not stand, and 6 justices agreed. The only dissenters were the most conservative members of the court, Clarence Thomas and Samuel Alito. That is it. Everyone else, including Trump's own appointees, ruled against him. Reuters covered the decision and used language that should terrify any president who cares about their legacy. They called it a rare public censure. They said it showed Trump had finally hit the limits of his power after a year of ruling like a monarch in Washington. Ruling like a monarch. That is not a left-wing opinion blog. That is Reuters, one of the most credible wire services on the planet. They watched Trump operate for 12 months without meaningful judicial pushback, and then they watched the Supreme Court slam the door. Their assessment was clear. The monarch had been told his crown does not include emergency tariff power. Al Jazeera's legal experts went even further on the institutional significance. They described the decision as the first time this term the court directly confronted what they called Trump's broader challenge to the rule of law. Broader challenge to the rule of law, that phrase matters. It means the court was not just ruling on tariffs. They were ruling on a pattern of stretching statutes, ignoring constitutional limits, and governing as if the normal checks on executive power did not apply. For the first time this term, the court looked at that pattern and said, no. Now let me take you inside the live meltdown, because the television coverage was unlike anything we have seen from a modern president. Trump did not issue a written statement. He did not have a spokesperson read carefully crafted talking points. He walked to a camera and started talking, and what came out was raw, unfiltered, and legally nonsensical. He called the justices Democrats in robes. That is factually false. 3 of the 6 justices in the majority were appointed by him. 2 of them were specifically chosen because conservative legal activists believed they would limit executive power. They did exactly that, and Trump called them Democrats. He said the ruling was terrible and deeply flawed. He did not explain why. He did not cite legal precedent. He did not point to dissenting opinions. He just declared it terrible as if his personal assessment overruled the Constitution. He said the justices hurt the country badly. Not that their legal reasoning was wrong. Not that their interpretation of the statute was mistaken. That they hurt the country, as if the Supreme Court's job is to help the president rather than to interpret the law. And then he dropped the line that will be replayed for years. He said they should be ashamed of themselves. The Chief Justice of the United States, who spent decades building a reputation as an institutionalist who cares about the court's legitimacy, was told by a sitting president to be ashamed. CBS New York covered the live remarks. The footage is out there. You can watch it yourself. A president attacking the judicial branch on live television because they told him no. Here is what makes this meltdown different from every other Trump controversy. He was not attacking the media. He was not attacking Democrats in Congress. He was attacking the Supreme Court. And he was doing it after his own appointees voted against him. The self-defeating nature of the Democrats in robes attack cannot be overstated. If the court had ruled against him 5-4 with only the liberal justices in the majority, he could have made a partisan argument. It would have been misleading, but it would have been internally consistent. That is not what happened. Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, and Barrett all said no. That means the conservative wing of the court, the justices who owe their positions to Trump's nominations, looked at his emergency power claim and found it legally indefensible. When you attack a ruling that includes your own appointees as partisan, you are not making a political argument. You are admitting that you do not understand how the court works or that you do not care. Either way, it is a devastating self-revelation captured on live television. The BBC covered the aftermath and documented something even more revealing than the meltdown itself. Within hours of the Supreme Court ruling, Trump announced a new 10% global tariff package. He was forced to officially wind down the invalidated emergency tariffs, and he immediately pivoted to a replacement plan. Think about what that pivot means. A president who has just been told by the Supreme Court that his emergency power claim is unconstitutional does not wait for a legal analysis, does not consult with constitutional scholars, does not ask Congress for new authority. He just announces a new tariff within hours. That is not a thoughtful legal response. That is political damage control. That is a president president who knows that the policy vacuum created by the judicial defeat will be filled by his opponents unless he fills it first. The BBC's documentation of that immediate pivot is the most revealing internal damage assessment available. Trump did not spend days crafting a response. He did not let the news cycle breathe. He got in front of cameras and announced a new tariff because he understood that the most devastating judicial defeat of his second term required the most urgent political momentum reclamation available. Now, let me connect this to the broader institutional pattern because the tariff ruling did not come out of nowhere. The Supreme Court had expanded Trump's authority repeatedly before this moment. Immunity in Trump versus United States, authority over immigration enforcement, power to purge agency officials, latitude to freeze congressionally appropriated spending. The court had given Trump tools that previous presidents did not have. But the tariff ruling revealed the conditionality of that expansion. The court expanded Trump's immunity for official acts, but they conditioned that expansion on a distinction between official and private conduct. The court expanded his authority over immigration, but they conditioned that expansion on compliance with statutory limits. And now, with the tariff ruling, the court expanded his emergency power authority right up to the line, and then said, you cannot cross it. The analytical framework that matters here is expansion conditioned on limits. The court is not giving Trump a blank check. They are giving him authority within defined constitutional boundaries. And when he tries to blow past those boundaries, as he did with EPA emergency powers, they say no. Even his own appointees say no. That is the pattern that Al Jazeera's legal experts were describing when they talked about the first time this term the court confronted Trump's broader challenge to the rule of law. The court had been accommodating, they had been expansive. But at some point, the pattern of stretching statutes and ignoring limits becomes a challenge to the rule of law itself, and at that point, the court pushes back. The tariff ruling was that pushback. It was the moment when a conservative Supreme Court told a Republican president that he had gone too far, and the live meltdown that followed was the moment when that president revealed that he had no idea how to process being told no. The economic and geopolitical consequences followed immediately. Bloomberg documented market jitters. Investors had priced in the assumption that Trump's emergency tariffs were permanent. The Supreme Court eliminated that assumption overnight. Markets do not like uncertainty, and the ruling created massive uncertainty about what trade authority the president actually has. Foreign allies were worried. The BBC and Reuters both covered the diplomatic fallout. America's trading partners had been operating under the assumption that Trump's tariff authority was legally unassailable. The Supreme Court said that assumption was wrong. Now those allies are recalibrating. They are reassessing. They are trying to figure out what the president can actually do and what will get struck down by the courts. And the midterm uncertainty is real. Trade policy was supposed to be a central pillar of the America First economic nationalism message. The Supreme Court just pulled that pillar out from under the administration. The 10% replacement tariff might fill the policy vacuum, but it does not restore the legal certainty. Every new trade action will face litigation. Every new emergency claim will face judicial scrutiny. The days of unchecked executive trade authority are over. Bloomberg's documentation of market jitters, foreign ally worry, and midterm uncertainty is the most comprehensive available confirmation of the practical consequences of the most devastating judicial defeat of Trump's second term. The ruling did not just embarrass the president on live television. It disrupted markets, alarmed allies, and scrambled the electoral message. Let me draw the contrast that captures this entire story in two sentences. Trump went on live television and said the justices should be ashamed of themselves. Roberts wrote in the formal published majority opinion that the president's emergency powers claim crossed constitutional lines and could not stand. That is the gap. Emotional shame demands from the president. Constitutional rule of law requirements from the Chief Justice. One is live television, raw and unfiltered. The other is a formal opinion, cited and precedential. One will be forgotten by next week. The other will be taught in law schools for decades. The should be ashamed of themselves versus rule of law must be maintained contrast is the most dramatically available accountability gap in modern presidential history. And it played out in real time on live television with the whole country watching. Reuters called it a rare public censure. That is exactly what it was. The Supreme Court rarely singles out a president's power grab for this kind of unanimous rebuke. They rarely use language that suggests the president has been ruling like a monarch. They rarely describe a case as the first time this term the court directly confronted a broader challenge to the rule of law. All of those rare things happened in this single ruling, and the president responded by melting down on live television. Here is what we need to watch as this story continues to develop. Watch the 10% replacement tariff litigation. The same major questions doctrine that killed the emergency tariffs applies to the replacement authority. If the courts apply the same constitutional scrutiny, the replacement tariffs could face the same fate. Every new trade action will be challenged. Every challenge will cite the Roberts opinion. The legal uncertainty is not going away. Watch Trump's continued public attacks on the court. The Democrats in robes and ashamed of themselves language could escalate. If Trump keeps attacking the judiciary, he risks turning the court from a reluctant check into an active adversary. The justices do not like being told they should be ashamed, and they have life tenure. Watch the midterm electoral polling. The most devastating judicial defeat, combined with the most live national broadcast meltdown, is not a good look for independent voters. Temperament matters in competitive districts. A president who attacks the Supreme Court on live television after his own appointees ruled against him is not projecting strength. He is projecting desperation. Watch the Republican congressional response. The ruling like a monarch characterization from Reuters is international news. Republican candidates in competitive districts will be asked whether they agree that Trump ruled like a monarch. Their answers will signal whether the bipartisan accountability coalition is growing or shrinking. Let me bring this all home with absolute clarity. The Supreme Court ruled 6-3 that Trump exceeded his authority by invoking EPA emergency powers for global tariffs. Chief Justice Roberts wrote the majority opinion. 3 Trump appointees joined the majority. Reuters called it a rare public censure, showing Trump finally hit the limits of his power after a year of ruling like a monarch in Washington. Al Jazeera reported legal experts seeing it as the first time this term the court directly confronted Trump's broader challenge to the rule of law. Trump went on live television and called the justices Democrats in robes. He said the ruling was terrible and deeply flawed. He said the justices hurt the country badly. He told them they should be ashamed of themselves. CBS New York documented the live remarks. The BBC documented Trump announcing a 10% replacement tariff within hours, even as he was forced to wind down the invalidated emergency tariffs. Bloomberg documented market jitters, worried foreign allies, and new trade policy uncertainty ahead of the midterms. Every element is documented. Every source is credible. The ruling like a monarch characterization is from Reuters. The first time confronting the rule of law assessment is from Al Jazeera's legal experts. The Democrats in robes live meltdown is from CBS New York. The 10% replacement pivot is from the BBC. The market jitters and foreign ally worry are from Bloomberg. The Supreme Court stripped Trump of executive power. Total meltdown erupted live on national television. And the most fundamental question of presidential accountability is now moving through the only institution that can actually check a president who believes he has no limits. We are going to be right here watching every single development as this story continues to unfold toward its most consequential constitutional and electoral outcomes. Drop a comment below and tell me what you think. Does the documented ruling like a monarch correction combined with the live national broadcast meltdown produce the most consequential temperament accountability consequences in competitive districts? Or does the Democrats in robes witch hunt framing successfully convert the most devastating judicial defeat into political martyrdom that paradoxically strengthens the base despite the most formally published constitutional correction? I want to hear from you. I will see you in the next video.